Mike, and thanks Tim for having me. That was about the nicest introduction ever. People normally read sort of a resume and it's so boring. That was great. So I figured I'm talking at the Colonel Richard Summers chapter. We have SAR and DAR here. So I decided I'd give you sort of a Revolutionary War story. It's a little bit of a mystery, has a twist at the end, a surprise twist at the end, and then we'll talk a little bit about the Summers Mansion where I started working literally this past semester. So the talk is called Donop Was Lost, using forensic science to resolve a case of mistaken identity from the American Revolution. Right, we're coming up on the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. This project started for me about 15 years ago, and it relates to kind of folklore of the Revolution. So up here I have a children's book that my mom gave me because she knew I was into Revolutionary War stuff. And it was called What This Time, Tempe Wick. And I don't know if you know the Tempe Wick story. It's a story of Morristown National Historical Park. The soldiers are there the winter of 1779 into 1780, again 1780 into 81. It's a terrible winter, especially 1779 into 80. And a group of soldiers, in some versions of the story, American soldiers, in some versions, British soldiers, look at the horse of a young lady, Tempe Wick, kind of longingly. I think they see hamburgers when they see it. And the local story is that she brought the horse up into her bedroom, the second floor of a very small colonial house, and kept it there to protect it from the soldiers. That story is almost certainly false because the house had one of what they call as box winder staircases. So this horse would have had to be as flexible as Donop. It's a great story. The story I want to focus on tonight is about Count or Colonel von Donop. He's a Hessian officer during the American Revolution. He is killed at the Battle of Red Bank in Gloucester County in 1777. And his skeleton becomes an object of interest for people. So, and parts of what were purported to be his skeleton, more specifically his skull, survives today in the collections of Rutgers University Special Collections and Archives. Here it is. It's in pretty good shape considering it's probably 250 years old. It's missing the jaw. It's missing all of its teeth. It has a broken nose and some other issues that you will see. So I first saw the skull, again, 15 years ago. I was in Bucklew Manor, which is New Brunswick's historic house museum. I was up on the second floor walking around, and look, it was like all sorts of bric-a-brac. It was fun. And then I saw in a case, there was a human skull. I was a little bit surprised. And it said, skull of Count von Donop, killed Battle of Red Bank. And I thought, oh my goodness, what is that doing there? So I made like a mental note. And then a few years later, Monmouth University, where I teach, we hired a forensic anthropologist, a gal named Amy Reyes. And forensic anthropologists are sort of funny people. They ask questions that are a little bit awkward. So one day she said to me, do you have like any skeletons that I could work with? And I thought, what is she asking me here? And I said, no, I don't think I do. And I thought, but there's this skull I saw up at Bucklew. So I called them, like a cold call, and I got Sarah Israel, who was the curator. And you might have thought I was trying to sell her a timeshare. Nothing to do with me. She said, there's no skull on display here. But she did take my number. And about 2 weeks later, she called me back and she said, turns out we did have a skull on display. It belongs to Rutgers. It's over at their special collections and archives. You should call them. Which I did. And then Amy went and ultimately looked at the skeleton. And more recently, a fellow Tom Christ, Hilary Delpre, another professor at Monmouth, and a student at Monmouth, Saeed Burgos Hernandez, have looked at it. But for the backstory, right? So the American Revolution, though we focus on kind of the local aspects of it, and New Jersey is most certainly the crossroads of the Revolution, with probably more battlefields, more historic sites associated with the Revolution than really any other state. Though I've noticed that North Carolina is starting to use similar advertising. I'm a little bit annoyed by that because I think we've got them. But the Revolution is really a global war. It's not only fought in North America, but there's fighting in Africa, the Caribbean, and in India. And this picture of a naval battle is just to illustrate that. The British Empire, in its attempt to subdue the rebellious colonies, is in desperate need of troops. They have a large standing army. They probably have the finest navy in the world. However, they don't have enough troops. So, as they attempt to exert pressure on the colonies, they negotiate with this fellow, the Landgraf, and that's essentially like a count or a prince of the Principality of Hesse in Germany. And he and some of his neighbors will provide over 18,000 troops who serve in North America. We typically call them Hessians, but they're actually from a group of different states.
Weren't they mercenaries?
In a sense, they are, because they're being paid to serve. Yeah, so that's a good use of the term. These Hessian troops are exceedingly well trained. They have a reputation for valor and for effectiveness on the battlefield and have fought all over Europe. Many of these principalities were quite small. They had very few sources of income, and one of the sources of income that they had was renting out their troops as mercenaries, as the young man said. American forces were often quite intimidated by the Hessians. They're well trained, they're well organized, they're well equipped. They really know what they're doing. This fellow is the focal point. I don't want to say the hero of our story. So this is Count Emil Ludwig von Donop. He is one of the higher-ranking Hessian officers here in North America, and he has dreams of grandeur. He writes in his notes that, left to his own devices, he would create an empire of his own in North America. So he's really a little bit out there. But as you can see, he's kind of a handsome gentleman. He's an interesting guy. He spends a lot of time in New Jersey. When the British initially invade the middle colonies, they land their forces on Staten Island, then there's this New York campaign. They really roll over New York and then into New Jersey. Von Donop serves with great distinction during that campaign. This is a Don Troiani painting of the fall of Fort Washington. A little bit closer to home, this is Burlington County. There's a historic site called White Hill Mansion that is in the little town of Fieldsboro, and it's undergoing restoration. This was owned by a woman named Mary Peel Field during the Revolution. She's from a prominent family. Two of her children will marry into the Stockton family, a very distinguished New Jersey family. But during the Revolution, it's a tough time for her. Her husband had passed away, drowned on the Delaware River right as the Revolution was beginning. He was in a small boat with an enslaved man. He fell out of the boat. They were unable to save him. His body washes up. So she's running a large estate pretty much solo. And she keeps a wonderful diary, and she notes that in 1776, as the Crown forces, the British and Hessians, are coming across New Jersey, she has a group of these soldiers come to her, and they say, "We want to use your house. We want to station troops in your house." And she says, "Well, I want nothing to do with that." And she sends them away. Later this same night, so this would be in December of 1776, she is in the house tending to a sick daughter, and she says a young Hessian officer bursts into her bedroom. She writes all about this. She screams, he screams, and then they start communicating, and he says, "So we are putting some troops in your house." And she says, "I don't want it." And he says, "I think you should ask for officers." And she's like, "I don't want it." And he said, "Right, so you're getting officers." A group of Hessian officers move in, including a physician, which proves really helpful because her daughter was quite ill. The physician helps save her daughter. So that is a little bit of a happy ending. But shortly thereafter, the Hessian commander in the area, Colonel von Donop, comes to visit. Now, Mary Peel Field is a resourceful woman, and she survives the Revolution with her plantation intact. Her children make good marriages. She does pretty well. This Hessian officer, though, and she marries an American officer, I should after her first husband passed away. But when Von Donop comes to visit, she describes him as handsome as a winged Mercury. This is like a rock star has just arrived. And, you can imagine the heart palpitations. He apparently rides up on a white horse. He has all these other guys on like matching horses with him. They're dressed to the nines. He comes in, they have tea. He gives her a paper that says the British troops will not burn down her house. It's great. And her house survives today, perhaps because of that. However, Von Donop is a little bit distracted, perhaps by Mrs. Field and others, and something happens that isn't so great for the Hessians, and that is the battles of Trenton and Princeton, right? So two significant defeats. Here is Colonel Rall at the Battle of Trenton, where he is defeated. Famous Washington surprise victory, the Christmas campaign, followed up by a second victory at Princeton. And then the Hessians pull back. They pull back to northern New Jersey, and they stay in the area around New Brunswick and Piscataway. And in 1777, spring of 1777, they go on campaign. They're going to try and bag the fox, trap Washington. They try and do this in an area called the Short Hills, and they fail. Washington doesn't come out and engage with them. This shows the movement of troops in that area. So then what do the Crown forces do? They decide, how do you win a war? You capture the capital of the other country. So the American capital at this point is Philadelphia, where our Museum of the American Revolution is. So they don't want to march across New Jersey. They've had some problems in New Jersey, Trenton, Princeton, so let's not do that. So they take ships down to head of Elkin, Maryland, and then they start marching up and fighting small battles as they move towards Philadelphia. Battles at places like Brandywine and Germantown, and ultimately they're able to take the city. The Americans had tried really hard to protect the approaches to Philadelphia. We put things called chevaux de frise in the river. These are essentially enormous spears the size of telephone poles, hooked up to big boxes of stone so that if a ship comes up the river, it gets stuck on that and it's helpless. This is a pretty recent discovery within the last 5 years. Archaeologists from the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission pulled some chevaux de frise out of the river. They're still there, which is kind of amazing. We also built a series of fortifications. So Philly's up here, right? And our fortifications are down here where the river narrows in an attempt to stop any naval traffic. So the British have come over land, captured Philadelphia, but they don't have the Delaware yet. Two of the most important forts are Fort Mifflin, which is by Philadelphia International Airport. You can still go visit it. And Fort Mercer in Red Bank, New Jersey. There are two Red Banks in New Jersey. One is up in Monmouth County, close to where I teach at Monmouth University. The other one is in Gloucester County. The British decide that they have to take these forts. And this leads to a bit of debate in Philadelphia among the British officers and the Hessian officers about how best to do this. Ultimately, they're going to send ships up the river. There is a small Pennsylvania Navy that attempts to defend the river unsuccessfully. And they're going to cross over into New Jersey and march south and take the forts. The fort we built at Red Bank, which you can see here, is a little bit asymmetrical. Normally in the Revolutionary War, forts are like stars or diamonds. Well, this one, it's kind of a mess. I mean, not to be a critic, I've never built a fort, so I'm sure it's better than anything I would build. The backstory here is that New Jersey militia built the fort. And then Washington, knowing that an attack was likely to come, sent over a French engineer. And he looked at it, and you can imagine he probably said, like, "Sacre bleu, this is terrible. Like, what are you guys doing? It's too big. You don't have a well inside. Were you planning on drinking while you were in here? Like, water is helpful." And he cuts it down. So this was the original fort, this sort of oddly shaped thing. And he built a wall inside it. And actually a strong point even within that. That's going to prove really important. If you visit the site, it's pretty cool. There are great monuments there. You can see some of the trenches which have been excavated. Back to Philadelphia, though. Lord William Howe here on the left, Colonel von Donop here on the right, are engaged in this debate over how best to take the fort. And Howe wants to take the forts on the Pennsylvania side first, and von Donop thinks that's a very bad idea. And he says, and you never want to say something like this, right? He says, like I think I could do that with a captain's guard. Like, you give me 12 guys, I can take that fort. And Howe calls his bluff and says, okay, go for it. Awkward moment, no doubt, at some tavern in colonial Philadelphia. So von Donop is dispatched with more than a captain's guard, but pretty ill-equipped. He doesn't have a lot of artillery. He doesn't have really any cavalry. He's got a modest force of Hessians. These are Hessian reenactors, but it gives you an idea of what they would have looked like. Pretty intimidating. Here's that fort again. So ships in the river. This is in Delaware. Initially, American ships trying to protect the fort, these smaller ones. There's some British vessels as well, larger ones. Again, notice the fortification. Kind of a star up here with a building in the middle. And then they've cut off part of it. This is going to be critical because when the Hessians attack, they surround 2/3 of the fort. Their attack comes in this direction. And they come over the wall. And actually, I should say first, Christopher Green and American troops from Rhode Island are holding the fort. They include African-American soldiers, which is pretty distinctive. Von Donop sends up a drummer boy. They get there sort of late in the afternoon. This is in October. And asks for the Americans to surrender, and the Americans refuse to do so. And the Hessians launch an attack over this wall, yelling Victoria. And they get into this open space, and they think they have won. There's nobody there. It's great, like we're in the fort. Victory! But the Americans are in here. And then they start firing on the Hessians, and it is just carnage. It is horrific. Von Donop himself is grievously wounded. His leg is shattered by shot. His immediate subordinates are also either killed or disabled. So it is a mess, and the Hessians pull back. Von Donop is abandoned, essentially, on the battlefield. He's left on the battlefield. And the Hessians are debating, like, what do we do? This hasn't worked out at all. Night falls. Von Donop will subsequently be found by an officer from the Continental Forces who's walking outside of the fort, seeing what is happening, when a man says, come here, in French, and comes over, and Von Donop is there. The Hessians had sent out, like, a search party for him. They got to him, and he said, I'm in too bad shape. You can't just leave me. So, ultimately, he's found by American troops. He's brought into the house of Anne Whittle, a Quaker who lives nearby. She's kind of funny. The two great Anne Whittle stories. They may both be apocryphal. Apocryphal stories are stories that are too good to be true, but I love them. One is that she was spinning with a spinning wheel during the battle, and a cannonball comes through the house, and she then moves the spinning wheel down into the basement to continue spinning because cannonballs are annoying. The other great story, again, probably apocryphal, is that when Von Donop and other wounded individuals are brought into the house, she criticizes them for fighting. So you can imagine, here you are, your leg has been shattered, you're either going to die from an infection or bleeding out, and this woman is telling you, like, you really shouldn't have been doing that. Like, you've probably figured that out. But nevertheless, so Von Donop is in bad shape. He ultimately will be buried on the battlefield. He passes away shortly thereafter. He's buried with military honors. A British surgeon is allowed to come over and attend to him and says, look, there's nothing I can really do. He passes away. And in fact, there are mass graves on the battlefield. This is the Anne Whittle House, which is now Gloucester County historic site. Great house. This map shows the fortification. So in the 19th century, Red Bank Battlefield becomes a tourist spot. So folks would come over from Philadelphia, they would visit the fort, They would see the soldier's grave, they would see von Donop's grave, they would see Ann Whittle's house. This is again where that attack occurred into the outworks. So this is from Barber and House, History of New Jersey, kind of classic 19th century history. The skull of von Donop, according to histories from the 1800s, was dug up by ruffians from Philadelphia. I hope none of you are ruffians from Philadelphia. And they extracted von Donop's teeth. Notice he has no teeth. And they set those into canes as souvenirs. So if you were like a pug ugly in downtown Philadelphia in 1840 on South Street, the cane with a tooth in it, I mean, what could be more intimidating? This skull starts to be associated with von Donop. Now, there are various descriptions from the 1800s of von Donop's burial. Some say that his burial actually washes away into the river, which would make this skull a little bit problematic. Another story says that the owner of the property digs up the skull and attempts to preserve it, but it is vandalized nevertheless. And then there's a third story that says, digging on a nearby farm field, a skeleton in a full uniform was found, believed to be von Donop, and the skull was associated with that. We do know that by the 1850s, the skull has come into the hands of a family of physicians from Gloucester County, and they hold on to it into the early 20th century. This Civil War physician, Mr. McWhorter, is one of the physicians who apparently had the skull for a while. I don't know if anybody would recognize this gentleman. When I was first getting into history, he was a big deal. This was Don Sinclair, who used to run the special collections at Rutgers Alexander Library. I understand Rutgers got the skull this way. So Richard McCormick, distinguished historian of New Jersey, I think during the bicentennial, was giving a talk in Gloucester County, and someone said to him, a local politician said to him, okay, I've got some things I'd love to give you. You never know what you're going to get when somebody says that. He was given a bunch of colonial documents and a human skull, apparently associated with Count von Donop. Sinclair kept the skull in his office. Today, I would say it's a little bit gauche. But at the time, it was probably a great conversation piece. So, to do a little bit of forensics, so bones can tell us a tremendous amount about an individual. In this case, this is at the Smithsonian. This gentleman donated his body to science. He also donated his Great Dane's body to science, and they mounted them together to show you can get stature from someone's skeleton. You can get nutritional deficiencies. This person had parodic hyperostosis. They were really malnourished during their lives, and their bone is resorbing. You can see things like tooth decay. Like that's you don't want to eat ice cream with that, right? You can see injuries. This is from a Scandinavian medieval site called Visby. It's a site that is sacked. It reminds me of something out of like Lord of the Rings. Look at this poor fellow got hit by 3 crossbow bolts in the back of the head. Like that's got to ruin your day. I don't know if bone training is going to fix that.
I don't think he knew it.
We do things to modify our bodies for beauty. So cradle boarding among some Native American societies. The ancient Maya used to lay little bits of jade into your teeth. That was supposed to look really great. We can tell basic things like gender or sex from skeletons, so male versus female, both from things like the pelvis, but also from things like a mastoid process behind your ear. They tend to be larger on men and women. Tell age from teeth, both when teeth come in and as teeth fall out. I'm into falling out process at this point. Sometimes we can see technology. So if you've got, like my mom has, replacement knees, that would show up if we were looking at her skeleton or looking at an X-ray. So that takes us back to Colonel von Donop. So we have 2 images of him. I've shown you both. This is my favorite. I like this. I mean, it's a typical sort of 18th century painting. He's like in a relaxed pose. He's a classy guy, well dressed. His dog loves him. We all want our pets to love us, right? He's hunting. There's an unfortunate rabbit that he's caught. He doesn't look like a huge guy. Looks sort of like maybe average size, a little bit thin even, perhaps. A little bit of a nose on him. So, looking at the skeleton, when Amy Reyes looked at it, she said, look, I just don't know if this is him. It's a person who's very gracile. Gracile means like thin boned or small bone. But she couldn't get past that. Now, today we have all sorts of technology that allowed us to get a little bit further. She did point out that at some point this individual, I'm going to move from Von Donop to this individual, had broken their nose, had all their teeth removed. That actually happens after death. We could tell that from the way the bone is. So that actually fits with the Philadelphia Vandal story. Looking at sort of standard male versus female, the skull may actually be a little bit more female looking than male. It's a good shape. It's really polished too, like people that hand it for a long time. We used a program called 4Disc, that's basically what I'm telling you here, where you take a ton of measurements on the skull, you put it into a computer program, and it tells you with a pretty high degree of accuracy. Are you looking at someone who's of European descent, of Native American descent, of African American descent? Folks at Rutgers University were obviously concerned that the skull might be a Native American skull mistaken for Count Von Donop. And that would have all sorts of ramifications because we have a law in the United States called NAGPRA, Native American Graves Protection Repatriation Act. You're not supposed to be digging up Native American graves without permission from Native Americans. It's very bad. It's bad form is the most modest way to put it. It's illegal. And it could also cause problems for a museum if they have those remains. So we took a bunch of measurements. We put it into 4Disc. Now there's a problem with 4Disc though, and that is it's based on measurements of modern populations, not on measurements of 18th century people, because we don't have that many of them. We put it in. We also noticed some other things. The person had osteophytes. Those are like little bony protrusions right here. This is where the spinal column went in. This is the foramen magnum. So they might have carried heavy stuff on their head. That was a little bit odd. We didn't imagine Count Von Donop carrying heavy stuff on his head. The person also had some anemia. So there's a porosity inside the eye orbits. It's called crigera orbitalia. That was a surprise. So when we put all the numbers into 4Disc, it turns out that this skull that people have believed is Count Von Donop for the last 150 years appears actually to be a person of European descent. So that was a relief for the folks at Rutgers. You can imagine a collective sigh going up in the groundswell. But appears to be a person of European descent who was a woman, not a man. So unless the count was much more interesting than we think he was, and he was interesting, this was surprising, person in their mid-30s, even though the historical evidence indicates that this was likely Von Donop, it looks like now we have a woman, perhaps associated with the battle, maybe a camp follower, maybe a servant working in a Whittle household who was buried on the battlefield, rediscovered, and misinterpreted, and perhaps even had all her teeth pulled out by vandals from Philadelphia for 150 years. So we informed our colleagues at Rutgers of these findings, and we said, next step, if you want us to take a next step, would be to take some bone and do some DNA analysis. Then you can say for sure, man, woman, Native American, African American, European. And we also consulted with, even though we don't believe at all that it's Native American, we consulted with descendant populations. And they said, even though it doesn't seem to be Native American, we don't really want you chipping bone away. We think that's inappropriate. So we respected their wishes. We have it. It's a shame that none of the teeth survive, because those would be particularly useful in terms of the DNA analysis. But they don't. So for now, the skull is believed to be a European woman from the 18th century, and Rutgers University is ultimately hoping to reinterpret it and rebury it and move it out. It doesn't belong in the library, that is for sure. And nobody's taking it out. So it was a really fun project. So last year, my friend and colleague Wade Katz did an archaeological dig at Red Bank Battlefield. And he wanted to define some of the trenches and see how much restoration had been done to them. And what he found, quite by surprise, was the mass grave of the Hessian troops from the Revolution. And this is a picture of his major excavation and screening some soil. I got to go down and help with some of the excavations. And he worked with ultimately the state police, the state forensic examiner, to try and identify those individuals who ultimately will be reburied. And he did some more work on the battlefield this year. So, and oh wait, there's more. It makes me think of Ron Popeil, the guy who used to sell stuff on TV. And there's more still, and that is, I had just a great opportunity this past spring to do some archaeology at the Summers Mansion, a place that obviously resonates with this group, in Summers Point, New Jersey. So Levi Fox, a public historian from Atlantic County, was able to secure a small grant, and we were able to do a survey of the property. Here we are, we did shell tests, which are about 18 inches around, about 3 feet down. We found artifacts all over the place, which was great. And it was a hodgepodge. There were Native American artifacts, there were early colonial artifacts, there were Victorian artifacts, and there was stuff from basically yesterday. So the whole range of time periods represented there. And then we opened up some bigger excavations like this one, where in this case, we might have like a privy or an outhouse. The artifacts have not all been washed, but you can see it was a pretty, this is Kira McHugh, it was a pretty exciting experience for the participants in that they're literally finding bags full, or enough artifacts to fill a bag. We don't find them in bags, of course, but you can see she's pretty excited by this, and stuff is right next to the house. And it's fascinating because the Summers Mansion is one of, if not the oldest house in Atlantic County. It's certainly a good contender. And the archaeology can really tell us a lot about the people who are living there. And one of the things that I could say, just right now, from preliminary analysis that was interesting is almost all colonial sites in New Jersey, the animal remains you find, the bones, are from pigs and chickens and cows. And a lot of wild fauna. You don't find a lot of white-tailed deer. You don't find a lot of fish bones. Cedar Ridge, I guess, would be an exception. But here, not only did we have beef bones and pork bones, but we had a ton of fish bones. Perhaps not surprising, given the location. We also had a lot of turtle bones. So I wonder if they're making like turtle soups or stews. So that was kind of a cool surprise. So here's Levi over on the left, and the McHugh family, and my wife who got dragged into digging. This is obviously post-photo. She really doesn't actually enjoy archaeology as much as I do. That's but a wonderful site, and hopefully at some point in the future, once we get all those artifacts analyzed, I'll be able to talk to you more about it. So thank you so much for having me today.
Take a few questions.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Questions, anybody?
Sir.
I was just up the Red Bank, and they are opening more and more developments as far as recoveries. It's quite an amazing thing.
I think it's one of the most important sites in the state, and the work they're doing there is spectacular. Yeah, that's Rowan University and Wade Katz and Jen Janowski and Colin. Really important work.
It shows the cost of the war in human terms.
That's a really important point. Yeah, very graphic. So these skeletons that were excavated, these fellows appear to have been, they may have been stripped of their uniforms. We did find some uniform buttons, but fewer than you would have expected. I mean, you think about like one of those great coats has like 30 buttons on it alone. We weren't finding, and it literally looks like they're being tossed, almost like cordwood, into open trenches, and then soil's being piled on top of them. And it must have been horrific, right? If you're a family back in some small town in Germany and your son went off to America and you're hoping that he will come back happy and healthy with some silver in his pocket, what a loss that must have been.
Was there any DNA done on those skeletons?
They're talking about doing it. I don't think they've done it yet. They reached out to like the German embassy. I mean, it's quite a project. It's a really good project. Any other sir?
Find any swords or muskets?
On this particular project, we did not. At Red Bank, they have musket balls and parts of uniforms. I just did a little project in Middlebrook, which is an encampment like Morristown or Valley Forge. It's in what today is Bridgewater and Boundbrook. And there we found 2 gun locks, which was pretty exciting. And they're both French Charleville, so it's like the French connection. How the French are really helping arm the U.S. forces by the end of the war. Good question. Sir?
The artifacts you're finding at Red Bank, where are they going now?
So I think they will first be cleaned, cataloged, studied at Rowan University by Wade Katz, who has a private consulting company, South River Consulting. And then ultimately, I think they will go to either the State Museum or a county level museum so that they can be part of future interpretations. And the bodies, any skeletal remains will be reburied.
So there's nowhere we could go to see them?
Well, if you go to the Whittle House right now, they do have pretty good displays of things that have been previously found on the battlefield. They have some really good artifacts. And I'm old-fashioned. I love like dioramas of military. They've got a great diorama too. So, anybody else with questions or comments? All right. Well, thanks so much for having me this evening and for being a wonderful host.